Is something Tashika could assist with?
You're live.
Okay, good. You know what, Tashika is saying live stream isn't available right now, enable.
You're live. Chris, you can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Jamaica Diaspora Task Force Action Network, JDTAN, discussion. Let's talk about Jamaica's strategic plan, Vision 2030. My name is Christopher Williams, Chair of the JDTAN Community Development Task Force. And today we have as our guests representatives from the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Citizen Security Secretariat, and the Ministry of National Security. Today's discussions will be moderated by Leo Gillen, Chairman of JDTAN. But before we start or hand over to Leo, let me just announce a few housekeeping rules. For members joining us on the JDTAN platform, you can participate in the discussions by typing your questions in the Q&A or type in the chat room. Those of us on Zoom, you can raise your hand or use your hand function, and we will take your questions. And I will now hand over to Leo.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening to everyone. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Angela. Both Christopher and Angela are the leaders, Christopher being the chair, Angela being the vice chair of the Community Development Task Force. And that Community Development Task Force has been around now for more than 4 or 5 months, and they're doing a wonderful job putting the plans together. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm glad that you were able to get some of the big names in Jamaica, the big planners of Jamaica's future online with us this evening. Let's talk a little bit about what to expect this evening. We're going to have several 1, 2, 3, 4 persons speak, and I'll have each of them introduce themselves as we go along. We're going to have the first person to speak on Vision 2030, Charles Clayton, he's the director at the PIOJ. Then we'll have the presentation on Citizen Security Plan with Dr. Donovan Johnson. From there, we go on to the crime prevention overview with Mrs. Renee Steele and Shauna Trowers. After that, we'll have a question and answer, Q&A. We already have some questions that came in when the notification went out on email this morning and on social media. There are persons who send their questions up front and say, I want to know about this, I want to know about this. All right, and then later on, we'll have Miss Angela Beeson give us the vote of thanks. Again, thank you for being here. And I am very, very happy to be able to bring this to you. Good evening, Charles, a long time no see you. I'm gonna have you first introduce yourself.
Thank you, Leo. I am Charles Clayton. I'm Program Director for the Community Renewal Program. And my main focus this evening is not so much on Vision 2030 as on the Community Renewal Program and how it links back. And later on, you will hear from the Ministry of National Security and the Citizen Security Plan Secretariat, who will share their particular component of the vision, what it is they're working on right now that they want Jamaicans to focus on. So thanks for having us this evening, and happy to be here with you again.
All right.
Still looking like the first time I met you.
You too. Thank you so much. All right, and then the next person that we want to introduce is Dr. Donovan Johnson. Donovan, are you there?
I am here.
Okay.
Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Johnson from the Citizen Security Secretariat at the Ministry of National Security.
That's all you want to say to me today, brethren?
For now, we're going to have a long presentation ahead of me.
All right, thank you so much for that. And then from here on, we'll go to Mrs. Renee Steele, National Security.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. So Renee Steele, I'm Senior Policy Director for Crime Prevention and Community Safety at the Ministry of National Security. I'll ditto Dr. Jackson's sentiment. I'll wait until I'm at the presentation. And please forgive me because I saw myself and CTD Trowers, who you'll get introduced to next. We saw the agenda late, so we do not have a formal presentation. So it'll be given it's a verbal overview of what we're doing, treating with.
Sometimes that goes over very, very well, better than the one that you read. Okay, so and you've been doing that for a while, so you know exactly what you're doing. So we're happy to have you.
Thanks for that, Leo.
Right, great. And then let's go to Shauna Trowers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Shauna Trowers, Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of National Security. I have oversight for crime prevention, rehabilitation, inspectorate policy. So I work very closely with our crime prevention branch, Ms. Renee Steele, who just introduced herself.
Great. This presentation is live on YouTube. That's youtube.com/JDTAN TV. But immediately, well, maybe a couple of days after, we'll take this recording and we'll spread it across probably 100,000 Jamaicans across the world. So people are going to get to see you. And so, thank you so much. People are going to get to see you now and after. So let's kick it off. Good evening again to everyone. And let's start with Mr. Charles Clayton. Mr. Charles Clayton.
I'm muted. So the order of presentation seems to be that you don't want too much of a visual presentation, but a short verbal presentation of what we do. Is that the idea?
We want your best presentation.
All right, so I'm going to share. Well, let me start off by giving a little context. You asked about the National Development Plan. And as most people know by now, there are 4 goals. Those 4 goals relate to the different areas of experience of humans in Jamaica. The first goal, Jamaicans are empowered to achieve their fullest potential, has 4 outcomes: healthy and stable population, world-class education and training, effective social protection, authentic and transformational culture. Those 4 outcomes relate to the strategies that are designed to fulfill that particular goal, which is human empowerment. The next goal, the Jamaican society secure, cohesive, and just, which is where much of what we're doing will be focused this evening, relates to 2 outcomes: security and safety and effective governance. And beneath those are strategies that are designed to secure our environment. And third goal, Jamaica's economy is prosperous. There are basically 6 outcomes relating to that: a stable macroeconomy, an enabling business environment, strong economic infrastructure, energy security and efficiency, a technology-enabled society, internationally competitive industry structures. And the 4th and final goal, Jamaica has a healthy natural environment, has 3 outcomes relating to that. Outcome number, which is really number 13. Number 1, sustainable management and use of environmental and natural resources. Hazard, risk reduction, and adaptation to climate change. And finally, sustainable urban and rural development. So those are the national goals and outcomes that we have in front of us. And they are set up broad strategies that are aligned to each of these outcomes. So when an entity or an individual wants to support the plan, usually you look for the strategies and see which outcomes they're aligned to and which goals. And you can go up the line from the strategy to the outcome to the goal to see where you are supporting the plan. You design your activities under the strategies, wherever you want to put them. So that is how the alignment takes place. As far as we are concerned now, I am in charge of a program called the Community Renewal Program. I don't know if you want to share a screen or just speak to it.
Please share the screen so that people can see it. That would be great.
All right, so I can share a screen. Let me try and share a screen now and be as quick as possible because I noticed the time was very small. All right, so you're seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Great. So the Community Renewal Program was introduced around about 2011 in response to what had happened in West Kingston. Everybody knows what happened around the island when we had that unrest, when we were trying to extradite Dudos from Jamaica. And then the Prime Minister, Bruce Golding, said to the PRJ, we needed a kind of strategic focus that would address some of the underlying issues that gave rise to the kind of results we saw at that time. So we did some assessments. We looked at past plans. We looked at activities that had been done before. We looked at the data, what the data was showing in terms of what were the factors that were attendant on that. And because of that, we said we wanted to focus on a developmental approach, not necessarily a crime fighting approach, but a developmental approach. And we recognized that a lot of the activities were aligned to community spaces, because this is where people embedded themselves, and they embedded a kind of subculture in these community spaces. So we said the focus needed to be on development of these community spaces. So we were not established as a crime fighting entity, but rather as a developmental tool. At the very beginning, we also recognized that a lot of agencies were involved and were already doing things, and they didn't need another agency going to duplicate what other agencies were doing. So instead, we said that our role needed to be to focus the attention of these implementing entities by providing information that could help them to make better decisions and focus and target better on the spaces that needed to be done. So we developed a framework around which to work, and we determined that what we needed to look at was what we called volatility and vulnerability. When we say volatility and vulnerability, we're speaking here about the extent to which, when we say volatility, extent to which a community might be prone or affected by violence, or be at a point where violence could happen at any time, or other factors that would make the community unsettled. And when we speak of vulnerability, we're talking about those issues that could make citizens in a particular community vulnerable to the influence of gangsters and other factors that might cause volatility. So we developed an index of vulnerability and volatility, and decided that the best thing should be to focus on the parishes which had sustained the highest murder rates over time, because these were likely to be the places where the communities that were most volatile and vulnerable were embedded. And so using that same index of volatility and vulnerability, we overlaid it on these 5 parishes. And as you can see from the map there, Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine, Clarendon, and St. James. Now it's acknowledged that Westmoreland has become another such parish. So there are really 6 now, but at that time there were 5. So we developed this index and overlaid it on the 5 parishes, all the communities within these parishes. And then those that scored the most, we selected the top 100 of them and say, this should be the focus of our attention, because by looking at them, we could probably address where the core of the problem was in Jamaica, by looking at the socioeconomic, what are all the factors that may be causing this. And so in looking at volatility, we looked at indicators relating to murders and shootings, violence-related injuries, presence of gangs, and so on as the main factors to consider for volatility. Then to measure vulnerability, we looked at things like child abuse, low child literacy. We chose child literacy simply because adult literacy is not collected at the community level. And so we didn't have data to measure that. So we looked at child literacy, the level of skills that existed or the lack of skills, teenage pregnancies, which is an indicator of gang presence very often too, limited accessibility of communities for policing, presence of ex-convicts, poverty, squatter settlements in a proximity, and unemployment as the main indicators of vulnerability. We combine those into a numerical formula, and we overlay that on the communities and came up with the top 100 by the score that they gave in terms of volatility or vulnerability. And so based on that, we said we needed to focus here. Now, in looking at the issues that needed to be addressed, we came up with 6 broad pillars that we said needed to be looked at. One was youth development. As everybody knows, youth are the main victims and perpetrators of violence and major crimes by a large margin. So whatever we did had to be a cross-cutting issue where they're embedded into everything else that was done. Then we looked at the issue of safety and justice, which is at the heart of what we will hear more about from our partners in the Ministry of National Security, as an issue that had to be addressed within the community space. Physical transformation, recognizing that the physical spaces sometimes affect behavior. Rundown environment sometimes leads to disorderly behavior, as we know. And also, poor sanitation has been associated with violence, though we don't know whether it's causality or association, but it's associated with it. Then we looked at social transformation, looking here at the kinds of issues that might have given rise to a person's vulnerability or a person's volatility. We recognize that people have been traumatized by exposure to violence and other issues that might have caused stress on them, but most of them were never treated for this. And so this has resulted in aberrant behavior. And so social transformation looks at that what needs to be done. It looks at how agencies serve these communities, how they relate to them, whether they have trust in these agencies or not. And so all those factors are considered under social transformation. For socioeconomic development, we recognize that no matter what you do, you can put a lot of nice buildings, put community centers, put people in houses, but if they are not able to sustain themselves economically, everything will fall back to where it's coming from. So we have to find ways of ensuring that more people are empowered through economic well-being. They can either work, they have access to jobs, or they're able to start their own businesses in order to sustain the environment. And last but not least, governance, which was at the core of what happened in West England, because there were alternative governance mechanisms that did not relate to democracy or did not align with the values that the wider societies have. So we have to ensure that the governance structures are aligned to a democratic process that is aligned to the values of the wider society in terms of morality and in terms of democracy, basically. So those are the 6 pillars that we say we consider these lenses of visibility that we should use to assess communities to see where the shortfall is, because we think that when you address all these 6 pillars and they are properly attended to, we can end up with communities that are self-sustaining. So that was the focus there. So broadly speaking, under each strategies, we developed a broad framework with outcomes defined, which relate to those 6 areas. I won't bother to detail them, just to say that the outcomes are described as: for governance, communities are capacitated and participating in democratic processes, and there are some broad strategies associated with that. Economic self-sufficiency among community members relating to the economic area that we mentioned earlier on. Cohesion, shared positive values and attitudes relating to social transformation. A safe environment with mechanisms for justice relating to the safety and justice pillar. And physical transformation, and we look at improvements to the built and natural environment as the outcome here. And I think finally, inclusion of youth in all developmental processes, and those strategies aligned around it. So those are how we actualize those 6 pillars. Now, in terms of what we do, we were never designed to be an implementing entity or to take the place of entities already which are defined or have the responsibility to do things in the community. What we are really designed to do is to enhance those processes by giving information. How we do that? We try to strengthen partnerships among the international development partners, the ministry departments and agencies, the non-government organizations and private sector entities to ensure that they work coherently together rather than against each other and stepping on each other's toes. We try to improve harmonization and coordination of efforts among the implementing partners. Where possible, we try to mobilize resources from whatever source to support implementation of actions that are necessary by our implementing partners. We try to support the design and our implementation of what we call catalytic interventions and policies that could advance the community transformation agenda. And when we say catalytic interventions, we're speaking about activities that could have a big impact on the outcomes within these community spaces. But we focus on those that nobody else is doing, where there's a gap, and we try to get somebody to do it and try to get resources for them to be able to do those actions. We have established and are operationalizing a monitoring and evaluation system, which we are bringing into alignment with the CSP monitoring and evaluation system to ensure that there's no doubling up or 2 different systems, that we're working together towards a common goal. So that is already in process at an advanced stage. And we have, of course, we try to improve the analysis and research capabilities among the implementing partners by giving them information and aligning them with information sources that can assist in the development of the strategies that they have or in advising them where they need to go. So I'm just going to skip over the achievements here. We have tried to develop partnerships, and we have developed quite a few. This report goes back to 2020. More has been done since then. We have completed an umbrella MOU under which we hope entities will be able to collaborate better in these spaces. We have worked with coordinating structures, piggybacking on other agencies. So for example, the SDC has what they call an parish interagency network, which was a mechanism that we're able to use to be able to bring agencies together to focus on specific communities. And of course, we have established technical working groups which look at the thematic focuses such as socioeconomic development to be able to develop actions around that where needed among the community spaces. We have worked in the communities to develop a mechanism for ensuring community participation is in the planning process. And we have developed through that process what we call participatory action frameworks for those communities that we have been into. And we have developed more than 12. We had 12 so far matrices that were prepared involving community members, agencies, and ourselves with information. And we have 12 of what was then targeted, 20 action plans completed up to that time. I'm going to skip what we have mobilized. We have had a number of catalytic interventions that we have supported. Most recently, the Youth Empowerment Program in St. James was very successful in that we had in the plan 80 high-risk youth who were given a individualized program that take into consideration all of the different experiences they would have and influences. And a program was crafted with their input to decide where they wanted to go. And they were brought to that program where they're given counseling, psychiatric interventions where necessary, and economic support to complete a program of training or to be self-starting on a business plan. And of the 80 who were there, more than 80% went through the program to completion. And somewhere around 70% did better than expected. I think more than 70% actually had an improvement in their risk assessment of more than 60%. So it was a successful program there. That is just an example of what we call catalytic interventions. That program was done under the sponsorship of USAID through their FHI 360 program. And we have since then looked at the tools that we have needed to assist in this process. And we have developed what we call a community readiness index, which is designed to help agencies to determine whether or not their intervention in a particular community is appropriate. At this time, they can assess what status the community is at in relation to those interventions, or if they need to do more work before bringing those interventions based on the readiness of the community. And we have also developed a community renewal index, which is an index that is developed to help us to see where the community has reached in terms of its development. And it's an index that can be compared across all the communities based on whether or not we have data available. So that index is a composite index that combines 5 or 6 different components, which are each assessed and scored, and then combined into that single indicator that is able to say how communities look in relation to each other and whether or not they are progressing in the right direction. We have developed a M&D framework and a baseline study template that we are working with the Ministry of National Security and the Citizen Security Plan to implement to ensure that we are all supporting the same thing. That database is also being used to support all the information systems across the security platform. So we are working together on that to ensure that we are not stepping on each other's toes. And we have developed, we have done training workshops, but more will have to be done when we have completed our alignment with the ministry. Then we'll have to work with them to ensure that all the MDAs and partners are actually all fair with this system and are able to contribute to it. So those are the mechanisms that we're using. And you'll hear more from the Ministry of National Security and the Citizen Security Plan Secretariat as to the specifics of the plan that we're supporting. So we have, to support research processes, we now host an annual best practice symposium where we try to bring information on best practices around the globe and in Jamaica that others can benefit from. So that is, in a nutshell, is the Community Renewal Program, how we have been working and how we are working going forward. Thanks for listening. I hope I didn't go was stumbling around too much.
You're excellent. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure I've gotten a couple of texts here, and they really enjoyed your presentation. They were enjoying it as it was going on. You say that you're not crime fighting, but your crime prevention by involving communities and planned communities the way that you are doing it. It is actually a crime fighting tool. It's crime prevention, and it becomes a crime fighting tool. So it reduces crime. So I'm very, very happy about that. Thank you so much. We will take questions for you at the end of the entire session. It's the back of it. So we'll leave the questions out for now, and then we'll move along to the next person. Thank you so much, Charles. Great presentation.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Let's go to Dr. Donovan Johnson.
I'm here trying to get my screen shared. Appears. Wait.
Dr. Donovan will be with us in a minute. He's trying to share his screen. Bear with him for a minute, or bear with us for a minute. And as you can still type your questions in, we will ask them, and we will identify you. So if you ask questions, be prepared to be identified, unless you say no, you don't want to be identified. But please go ahead and type your question in the chat box. Any question that you have, it will come to us, and we'll be able to answer those questions at the end of it all.
Great, I'm back.
There you go.
All right, greetings again, everyone. Sorry about that. I am Donovan Johnson from the Citizen Security Secretariat. The Citizen Security Secretariat is the secretariat that supports the Citizen Security Plan, or the Citizen Security Plan is that social intervention slash social investment arm of the government's overall crime fighting thrust, national security thrust, so to speak. This Citizen Security Secretariat, the Citizen Security Plan overall focuses on a cross-cutting and all-of-government approach that is geared towards driving social intervention and driving social investment across the most vulnerable spaces. Now, earlier, Charles would have spoken about the CRP's pioneering work in terms of identifying vulnerable and volatile spaces. The Citizen Security Plan focuses on the 20 most vulnerable and volatile communities, as well as the zones of special operation across the entire landscape of the country, to coordinate across the entire length and breadth of government all the different social intervention activities that are happening, so that we may achieve a more targeted approach towards social investment in these volatile and vulnerable spaces. In 2020, the Cabinet approved this plan, and it has been funded through partnership with the European Union. Now, this, as I said before, it's an all-of-government thrust, and so there are all government partners, all ministries, departments, and agencies that do anything related to social intervention and social investment are convened at the Citizen Security Plan to better coordinate and deliver all, as I have said before, the social intervention and social investment activities that are happening across government in these vulnerable and volatile spaces. Now, the CSP, the Citizen Security Plan, is premised on 3 broad pillars, one being creating safer spaces. That is, creating spaces where persons feel safe to live, to exist, to do business, to go to school, to do all the activities of life that one would want to participate in a safe way. And we believe that this is critical and crucial to the overall sustenance of national security and crime prevention. The other pillar of the CSP is the development of human and community capacity. We know that when people's lives are made richer and more unfettered, it makes them better citizens overall, and it makes for a better and more cohesive society. And thirdly, the reduction of crime and violence. So we also, the agencies and ministries, departments, and agencies that are convened under the CSP are focused, their intervention strategies are partly focused on reducing crime across these vulnerable spaces. The Citizen Security Secretariat, importantly, is not an implementing agency. We monitor and evaluate the activities of the implementing agencies, of the ministries, departments, and agencies that are delivering social investment and social interventions across these spaces that I've identified before. And by doing that, we take a more satellite view where we're able to see what is happening in different spaces, and we're able to provide information and guidance to different MDAs on how to go about doing or delivering any social intervention based on the fact that we are able to see everything that is happening in these spaces. And to also facilitate a kind of removal of bottlenecks, help to guide implementation, and help to provide technical and advisory support to the various MDAs that are delivering social intervention and social investment activities across these different spaces. Now, the CSS is premised on some specific data needs. We use data, as the monitoring and evaluation unit of the Citizen Security Plan, we crave data on the various indicators under the CSP, because the CSP is built on, and I will go into that further on, a specific number of indicators that tell us how well the Citizen Security Plan is performing, so that we know, as we go along, we are able to tweak and to adjust the plan to suit the needs of the status quo. We also rely on baseline and progress data, and we also rely on data on wraparound and partnerships and collaborations, which is why we're here today, because we convene and talk and communicate with different partners across a wide spectrum, so that we're able to identify those points at which we may be able to facilitate some kind of wraparounds and partnerships in the delivery of those broad aims that I mentioned before, which are safer spaces, human and community development, as well as crime and violence reduction. Now, at the CSS rather, we take this linear approach in terms of how we carry out our mandate as a delivery unit. We operate on the ethos of deliverology, which basically goes along this chain where we identify the data needs and we identify the nodes of available data. And we move from that to identify additional data needs and data collection tools. And we move to compile and assess data, all within the sphere of being the unit that monitors and evaluates the activities of the different partners under the CSP. So the whole idea is that all of these agencies, ministries, departments, and agencies come together to, in a very unified and collaborative way, deliver social intervention activities across different communities to produce these outcomes in these spaces. The idea and the intention is that this operates predominantly, and CTD Charles will speak about this a little bit more later on. It provides a comfortable framework for crime prevention, so that we do not get to the point where we are responding, but we are being very proactive in how we go about treating with as we all know, the country is facing a national security situation at this time, or has been over time. Now, there are over 29 entities under the Citizen Security Plan that are delivering social intervention and social investment activities across the spaces. About 8 of these indicators account for 80%. 8 of these entities rather account for about 80% of the indicators, and we are tracking over 143 indicators across the Citizen Security Plan. And so you get a sense of the gamut of work that we do in terms of not only in terms of monitoring these 143 indicators, but it gives you an indication of the amount of work that these ministries, departments, and agencies are delivering across these spaces. And it also gives you an indication of the different points of potential partnerships that can occur under the entire citizen security plan that the government has proffered. Now, in years 1 and 2 of the implementation of the CSP, there was a focus on these 5 strategic areas, which is data collection and data integration, the development of infrastructure. We also focused on behavior change and case management, and youth empowerment and certification, as well as governance and accountability systems across the government. And we believe that these 5 areas set a very strong foundation for us to build on even some of the things that Charles would have mentioned earlier in terms of reaching some of these spaces and ensuring that social intervention and social investment is sustained over the medium to long term. And so the results is that we have had many successes. We have, across many of the spaces, we have managed to develop, or partners rather have managed to develop more safer spaces. We have managed to, for example, rehabilitate some of our police stations. We have been building out our conversations and our commitments across the CSP as it relates to.
Donovan, let me say something. I think you probably are scrolling down your slides and you're seeing them separately, but we are not seeing the slides. Okay. So, all right.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Are you seeing the slide which says results 2020 now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The results 2020.
Yeah. So we have managed, as I said, we have managed to achieve some of those successes. Under youth empowerment, we have a 25 school strategy, which has seen many successes and continue to show the prospects for greater successes over time. And so as we go along, we are recognizing some of these successes and hope to build on those successes even further. So for year 2 and 3, we intend to focus on more on an integrated strategy of youth certification and employment. We understand that many of our youths move from being at a place of being at risk to being violence producers, and we want to disrupt that kind of trajectory through social intervention, and so we are focusing on that. We also want to drive more data collection so that we can make more evidence-based decision-making across the citizen security plan, and foster a more integrated strategy for safer spaces. We want to broaden our scope and our interpretation of what a safe space means. And importantly, we also want to, and I'm sure Director Steele will drive this point home even more strongly than I can, we want to build out our capacities in terms of case management and integrated case management to support not only just the school strategy, but to support overall our youths and children that are at risk across the length and breadth of our country. And so some of the potential areas I'd imagine, and I'm also, this is a very interactive and collaborative space, but from my end, some of the areas of partnership that I see under the CSP with the diaspora group is under the 25 school strategy. There are many opportunities for partnerships, and we look forward to that. And we also are looking forward to partnerships in terms of the strengths of the diaspora group and how those can facilitate different kinds of exchanges between home and abroad in a more strategic way, or in ways that may guide that kind of collaboration that we're seeking and drive success. That's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donovan there. I have a lot of questions for you. So
Certainly.
Later on, right? But you made a really good presentation. The approach is great. I'm looking at your 3 planks what are they again? Safer space, human and community development, and then also reducing crime. Those are great pillars. It looks like safer space and reducing crime seem to be tied in. I'm probably gonna need to understand what the meaning of safer space is later, and I'm sure that most people would want to understand that. And then I see how it ties into the Ministry of Education. You were talking about the somewhat type of unattached youth there. I saw that. And then I saw you're asking for internships with any kind of diaspora group. Those are great things that we can talk about. I really appreciate that. So we probably want to go through a little bit more about the safer space and also the crime reduction plan. So I mean, and you don't just have to give me an overview. That's not no biggie. All right.
Yeah,
so
certainly.
All right. Thank you so much.
Not a problem.
All right. Next we have up is Mrs. Steele. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here, Leah. I'm going to defer to Ms. Trowers.
Okay, then.
And then I'll chip in where necessary.
All right. So
she will lead and I will support.
All right. Ms. Shauna Trowers is up next.
Thank you, Mr. Gilling. So I think that my colleagues from the CSS and the CRP, I wish I could just say ditto because we're all one big part of one big family, just different roles. And so the Ministry of National Security is the key ministry providing for security overall, national security, and an important part of national security, of course, is citizen security. And that is felt in many different ways. But more importantly, how do citizens perceive security, and are they feeling secure within their own homes, within their communities? And so the crime prevention branch in particular is given the responsibility to pull together that portfolio, not in a monitoring sense, that is for the CSS, but in a more, I would say, both policy and portfolio. So portfolio looks at providing for programs and projects within this area, looking at the at-risk individual, as well as making responses to volatile and vulnerable communities. What that means is that we work very closely with the data providers and the implementing agencies, the ministries, departments, and agencies. So PIOJ is like our brother. They're not our cousin, they're our close brother in terms of ensuring that we have the sort of data that provides for the baseline so we know exactly what we're treating with. The Community Renewal Program has had a tested and proven methodology that we lean into. No need to recreate a wheel. We are just adding to it to make sure that we know exactly how to get about it, and their best practices have shown us this. We are partners with them. The CSS is taking it. I like what Dr. Johnson said from a satellite. I felt so bright when he said it. I'm going to copy it from him. No, from a satellite view, meaning overhead and giving the kind of connecting the dots that sometimes we cannot do at the ministry level. And so in terms of our responses from the crime prevention, we would be focusing, when we look at the at-risk individual, the risk and needs assessment and service renewal. We also look for case management. I know Dr. Johnson alluded to it. And so what we are working with our other MDs is ensuring that there is synergy. There can be case management tools standalone in different areas, but for us to get the sort of impact that is needed for the at-risk individual, it is best that the information is shared and analyzed in tandem. The second thing we look at is the tailored skills training program. And when we think of tailored skills training, we're looking both at academic and vocational. And here I would want to mention the JDF and HEART program. So there is a program that we implemented along with the JDF, to a lesser extent the CMU, which is the Caribbean Maritime University, and the HEART, which looks at taking at-risk, unattached youth to provide for heavy duty vehicle training, articulated truck driving. And we recognized that we needed to be responsive to the space. So gone were the times where persons may want to do garden and so forth. We needed to figure out what the economic environment needing and what were the interests of the at-risk youth. And this was seen as a great opportunity. 2 cohorts were levied in terms of one in St. James and the other one in Kingston. And we're looking at a second iteration of that project. And maybe Ms. Steele can chip in a little after and give you some more details, because I'm sure you'd want to know about that. That is a very important training ground that we think that we can partner in. There's also the music, sports, and technology. And we looked at that in both the primary and secondary schools. And why we focused on that is that persons who are at risk and traumatized, clearly the readiness to learn and the ability to learn in diverse ways, different pedagogies is a sort of approach that is required. Of course, we partner with the Ministry of Education, youth in this. And we would have been partnering with the Jamaican Orchestra when prior to the pandemic, a little less now that the pandemic has come and we have seen a reduction in the hubs. But we did that. We also looked at robotics, using technology to leverage numeracy skills, because coding is important in terms of math. And also for sports for our young at-risk unattached. The fourth thing I would want to mention here under the at-risk individual is our We Transform Youth Empowerment Program. Now that program is directly targeted to those that are considered or juvenile, and when I say juvenile, they are currently in our juvenile correctional institutions, whether they are wards or remandees. Remandees mean that they have not yet been sentenced and they're being held, and wards mean that they either have been sentenced or have been placed on correctional order because they're considered uncontrolled and have already been seen by a judge and ordered to be in the institution. So the We Transform Youth Empowerment Program really, I would say, leans into cognitive behavioral therapy and also mentorship as one of the key flagships. Mentorship, because about positive reinforcement, many of the juveniles who enter the juvenile space are devoid of certain one-on-one interaction. And there was one thing we noted, that even in discussions with them, we asked persons in the same cohort, what made you not choose this lifestyle that your other friends chose? And they always mentioned that they had one person, no matter how bad they, and we put bad in quotation, no matter how bad they were, they had this one person who continued to support them and push them. And so we thought mentorship was important. And lastly, under the at-risk individual, we also look at support to the reintegration of or involuntary return migrants. I think colloquially we call it deportees, but we have decided that no, that don't sound too right. So involuntary return migrants, Mr. Gilling's laughing. And so there's a need for us to support them, because, I mean, not every single IRM has committed what we considered atrocious crimes. Some have just been a product of maybe their circumstance. And even if you had committed a crime and you have done your time, there is the view that you should not be repunished. And so the integration efforts are immense in that response. We also look at volatile and vulnerable communities when we look at crime prevention and management. And a part of our strategy is to look at violence prevention boards. One of, I would say, the most successful I can cite, and maybe Renee can correct me, is an example that we see in Clarendon, where we see the business community and we see the civic groups come together, and they are very influential in the space and ensuring that there is a holistic response to the crime and violence that could happen in the surroundings. We also look at the engagement of the CDCs in terms of developing violence prevention plans. And Charles would have alluded to the fact that there is synergy with the on-the-ground organizations. Once again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's why there's the SDC. And so we will partner with our colleagues on the ground to work with the CDC to provide for the violence prevention plans. Crime Stop is a major program, but there's also greater sensitization needed at the community level. We have recognized that. And so in doing that, there needs to be an improvement, and we have started that in terms of the police and citizens. So the concern is to ensure that there's enhanced community-based policing. And we have partnered with some of our IDPs, and we have a range of them, but we are working specifically starting March 2022 with USAID to fund a 2-year project that aims at building or improving the relationship between our police, cadets, and youth in the selected communities. What is important is that Dr. Johnson cited the 25 school strategy, and that's promulgated by the Ministry of Education, supported by all the MBAs who work towards citizen security. We have therefore recognized that where there are gaps in any sort of area, that we must be responsive. So there is a concerted effort to ensure that we're not siloing this project, but it forms a part of the greater response to citizen security. And so of those 22 schools and 9 communities, they are directly aligned with citizen security and aligned with the methodology, having looked at CRP. So they do conform to the vulnerable and volatile, both individuals and communities. And so just as a synopsis, I wanted to highlight 9 key activities that we're involved in terms of crime prevention and management. Community scorecards. Where exactly are is the community? What is needed for development? What is needed for renewal? What is needed for sustainability? Mentorship. Positive role models, influencing. Parenting. Of course, delivered in conjunction with police support, because we have to recognize that there may be those who have already come into contact with the law. And so therefore there has to be a synergistic approach, both in terms of looking at the community-based policing and parenting, needs assessment and timely service referral. Many of the juveniles that we see and we identify as uncontrolled have been exposed to trauma. And what that means is that if they don't get the sort of service and access to the intervention timely, then what we see is that we have to deal with them on the back end. And so we're not trying to solve I would say the symptoms, or trying to really solve the disease. And so we're really using a public health approach, very holistic, a wraparound approach. Dr. Johnson spoke about it, and so did Mr. Clayton. Social media campaign. Why is that important? Social media is important because I once heard a statement that says culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. So with the best strategy, unless the mindset of the persons and the communities change, then we are hard pressed and we will find ourselves pushing a rock up a hill, and we've recognized that. So constant messaging in order to provide for the change and to also provide information in terms of transparency, both on our part and accountability, to provide for a better social contract. We also look at child diversion. Not everyone that comes into contact with the law needs to be incarcerated or provided through the judicial system. There are diversion mechanisms that can work, and we have seen around the world that it has really assisted in certain cases. And so we are totally committed to that in collaboration with the Ministry of Justice. Restorative justice, again, falls under the Ministry of Justice, but we are working very closely with them because we also need to look at the overall reason for many of these crimes. Some of them are reprisals. It goes back to the basic tenet of forgiveness and how we can move forward after events has happened. And lastly, once again, our sports and music. And so those are, or this is the overview of our crime prevention and management plan from national security.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shauna Trowers. An excellent verbal there. I was picturing everything as you spoke. It was like watching Charles and Dr. Donovan there.
Thank you, Sir Gilling.
It's pretty good. Thank you. I don't know if Renee has anything to add. She could say no or yes, I have.
No, I'm good, Leo. I'm good. When the specific questions come, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, well, thank you guys. That's really a very clear picture for us. I know that the community development task force is ready to roll, and they were really waiting on these types of pointers to help them, to direct them in a path that they are comfortable with and which they can find resources to bear. First question I have and I'll take the others from the other guys on the team. The first two questions I have, one is for Dr. Donovan. Behavior change. For whom were you thinking about behavior change? And are these policy changes for like law enforcement that will change behavior? Or are you talking about behavior for community individuals, which is kind of more difficult?
So thanks, Leo. So the behavior change that we're focusing on touches on all of those areas that you mentioned. Specifically, for example, one of the indicators that we're tracking comes from the National Parenting Support Commission. We want to see the extent to which targeted and customized behavior change intervention programs can help to improve parenting across the country, because we understand that that is also, and CTD Charles spoke earlier about the symptoms, and that is also part of our overall crime situation. It plays a factor. We understand that if we have better parenting, we will have better youth and we'll have a better society overall. And so we'd like to see behavior change in that aspect. We'd also like to see behavior change amongst our youths in terms of lifestyle choices, and specifically as it relates to helping our youths to move from being at risk to more valuable contributors of society and to their own lives and livelihoods and to the lives they lead in that specific way. So we want to see behavior change in that area as well, in terms of the at-risk youth population. And that is why we focus also, or implementing agencies such as the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Labor and Social Security focuses on case management to help track, monitor, and implement the kind of interventions that will help to see that kind of behavior change. So it's a wide spectrum and cross-section of all of those individuals that you touched upon, or classifications of citizens. We'd like to see that kind of behavior change.
Excellent. And this is for everybody. If you can answer this question too, because it's pretty easy. It's mostly for the general public, because I think people need to understand how resources come to bear. Okay, so we spoke about those three planks: safer spaces, human and community development, and reducing crime. Mm-hmm. How does the government, let's say in community development, how does the government put or implement resources? Where are the resources coming from? Is it a budgeted item that they put cash into an institution, and in the institution delivers the activities? Or is it that we have the government has programs that they put funding into? And I mean, how is that going? Because people tend to think cash when they talk about resources, but we want them to also understand that when you dispatch a police officer, that's resources, and a police car is resources. And when you dispatch Renee Steele or Shauna to come to speak here, that's putting resources to bear, and it costs money, that kind of thing. So I hope it's an easy question.
It's a very, very easy question for CTD Trowers. She's an expert in finance and how we shouldn't occur.
Feel like that was a setup. No.
She's a decorated public servant from the Ministry of Finance in her former life.
I think it's there are different modalities, Leo, in terms of providing for funding. So one of the most sustainable, of course, is to run it through the budget in terms of providing budgetary support, where ministries, departments, and agencies agree that this is a priority of the government and the monies are therefore allocated from source, which would be the Ministry of Finance, and through the Treasury to the budget, and it is aligned to our activities. Now, the current budget system is a results-based budget, meaning that it must align with a policy. So the policy that the government has been committed to is the citizen security plan. And so every single MDA that has stake in citizen security, whether it be Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Health, Justice, MNS, PIOJ, would have an aligned item and be aligned in terms of their operationalization of that plan and budget for it. But outside of that, there are also targeted programs and projects that can be utilized to augment, because there's no money, as you know, is fungible. There's no excess source of money. And so the government also has fiscal constraints. And so when we have programs and portfolios, there has to be oversight so that there is clear connectivity. This is where PIOJ is important, because they look at the macroeconomic overview and look at how our multilateral and bilateral relations feed in. And so where there are gaps and there are places for the sort of relationship in terms of funding, whether in terms of technical support, technical assistance, or actual grants or loans, PIOJ would work with the line ministry as well as the Ministry of Finance to provide for those programs and projects. So it is both through the budget and through our partnerships with and we also partner with NGOs as well, who can provide expertise.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. I told you it wasn't for me, it was for the public.
I have a question as well, Leo.
Go ahead.
Okay, so not sure who is going to take this one, but there are actually two questions. And I think Shauna did mention about, changing the name of deportee to involuntary returning migrant, something to that effect. Is there any conversation regarding the name Zozo? I know it's, it has some military connotations to it, but, we all know that words do matter. Is there any conversation to relabel these targeted communities so you don't have that type of stigma attached to it? And part two is also, is there also a culture of volunteerism being created where persons who want to support all the initiatives, whether it's mentorship or, just being out there within the communities, is there any program where persons can sign up to volunteer so they can, give back to the community?
All right, Chris, I think I'll attempt to answer these questions, and my colleague will support as needed. In terms of the name, so ZOSO, which means Zone of Special Operations. I think what may have happened is that because since the inception of the state of emergency, there tends to be an interchange between what we appreciate a SOE to be vis-a-vis a ZOSO. So the SOE, state of emergency, as per the law, is a more militarized approach to crime management, right? The ZOSO, however, as defined by the legislation, speaks strongly to a social investment component. So let us talk about the overall approach in terms of clear, hold, and build.
Mm-hmm.
The state of emergency focuses more so on your clearing component in a broad sense. That's where it is heavily focused, heavily intervention coming from your security forces, combined efforts from the police and the army. However, in your transition from holding to building, that is where you now focus on the work of a ZOSO. So the Social Intervention Committee, as per the legislation, speaks to the involvement or contributions across key ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as involvement from your community groups, big society, academia, who really should come together through coordinated efforts to seek to rebuild that vulnerable space. So the ZOSO is very, as I say, there's a social focus with the zones of special operations. I think perhaps from a standpoint of public education, there is more that we can do to sensitize our various audiences in terms of what the ZOSO is, what it represents as per the legislation, how we as a government intend or are applying the legislation to rebuilding of these communities. So it's a softer side. Yeah. So you would have seen here locally where there is a shift in terms of particular responses from the government. Whilst it is that the SOEs have proven to be successful as an immediate response or rapid response to treating with those high homicide numbers in particular, the ZOSO is what we're relying on as a government for a more sustained response to the crime prevention, crime management to achieve those results in the medium to long term. So that's the response to the terminology of ZOSO. As it relates to the culture of volunteerism, yes, there is a very heavy culture of volunteerism. You have several groups and entities at various levels who support that, promote that. From a government standpoint, we are most interested in ensuring that whosoever is coming to volunteer goes through a robust vetting process and they volunteer within a structured program, whether it is a program directly implemented by the government or a program endorsed by government. On this particular platform, CTD Charles would have spoken about the We Transform Youth Empowerment Program. That is an excellent platform through which we're looking to expand the number of mentors who come into play. And that particular platform also engaged with other intervention programs that we can refer mentors to. So persons can come, be trained using the We Transform mentorship methodology, and then we can refer them to other initiatives accordingly.
I like that a lot. I think he's asking on the first question if we could change it to zones of social operation.
Well, I think that is something that we'd have to put forward to the joint task force because it's embedded in legislation. It is something to consider, Chris.
It's much softer, It's like you're talking about inner city communities, It's people, once you live in those environments, you start to display certain behavior, which I'm sure this is exactly what we're trying to change. Another question is, what significant role is, let's say, the churches in Jamaica and to corporate Jamaica play in supporting the ZOSO?
So again, as per the legislation, the churches, along with the private sector, you said business sector, right, they play a critical role, both in terms of provision of resources. I would say both financial in the case of the business sector, but more so human resources. The beauty of the Social Intervention Committee, it has the potential to allow for that coordinated framework. So let us say we're looking at ZOSO A. Good. A concise mapping is done to identify who are those key players in that given space. You identify your ministries, departments, and agencies, your civic society groups and non-government organizations. You include your churches as well as persons from the business sector. What you find from... Yes, Leo?
Oh, sorry, Rennie. I thought you were done. When you're done.
Okay, sure. So what you find from time to time is that different ZOSOs or different communities come with particular nuances. So where, for example, the church and private sector, business sector may be more robust in community one, you may not see that happening in community B or C. What I can speak to, and Charles came in at an excellent point, at an excellent time. What we're trying to do now is to better coordinate or provide for a more inclusive framework in which the church in particular can play a greater role in its contributions to the government, to meeting the government's priorities. We've also noticed that from the standpoint of the international donor partners, there is a whole lot more emphasis being placed on contributions coming in from the business sector towards interventions treating with attributes and broad crime prevention initiatives. So for example, if I make reference to USAID, over the last year and a half to 2 years, USAID and its different tentacles, if you will, have been very deliberate in identifying key agencies from the business sector to go about developing joint youth crime prevention interventions using what we term as co-creation. Co-creation speaks to both or all stakeholders coming to the table, sharing what their priorities are, their interests are, and coming together to develop a comprehensive response to treating with the issue. So you scratch my back, I scratch yours. So more and more what that has done is that not only are you seeing the private sector coming into play, maybe doing training for argument's sake or giving talks, you see an increase in the specific skills training based on what the market needs are. For example, there's a program going on now in Montego Bay where manpower is going to be training persons for that particular industry. When the persons are trained, they will have automatic job placement or internships at manpower.
Wonderful.
So you see, so yeah, because we've gotten over the years that, you know, there is a fatigue amongst our youth that we try to work with. They get a lot of training, but then what happens after the fact? Charles?
Yes, thanks, Renee. So just elaborating a little bit on the church interventions. We have had some very strong approaches from the church in recent times. We had reached out to them, both ourselves and the Ministry of National Security, in the past for them to become active, but even more recently, we have had church groupings. You would be aware of Operation Save Jamaica, which is one grouping of churches, and you'd be aware of the umbrella group of churches, the broader umbrella group, and both are now actively seeking to create a framework under which the churches can collaborate more in a more identifiable role, and more specifically in spaces which they can identify with specific actions. Right now, I'm aware of a number of church organizations which are now seeking funding from the IDPs and the various mechanisms for them to be able to implement programs that will tackle the problem. And we're now working with another church group, the Umbrella Church of Group, a group of churches, to create a framework under which they can now collaborate and work together to identify where they go and in using what mechanisms. Operation Save Jamaica has been working with different church groupings across the parishes, which are now active individually, and they want to work together to ensure that they are actually aligned with the priorities of the crime plan and with where we are targeting in terms of the spaces to go, the mechanisms to go, and the resources that are needed for those spaces. So right now they're very active in the background, and we hope that very soon we will have a common framework under which they can operate.
Dr. Donovan had a comment.
Yes, I would also like to add to what Director Steele and Charles would have mentioned just now, that the church, community-based organizations, civil society groups, private sector organizations form part of the oversight mechanism under the Citizen Security Plan. They are convened at what we call CMOC, the Crime Monitoring Unit, which basically their role forms part of the governance framework of the CSP. So they, as the name suggests, monitor and provide oversight of the activities and the plans that are related to crime prevention and crime reduction across the country. So they do play a critical role, and under the monitoring and evaluation framework of the CSP, they also have specific indicators which are related to the kinds of public statements they make in terms of holding the government to account, to the plan that the government has articulated as its strategy to reducing crime. So they do play a very critical and crucial role, both in terms of the active part that Renee and Charles have spoken about, but also as it relates to monitoring and oversight.
Thank you so much for that. For our public, I just want you stay with me, Dr. Donovan, because I want to get an understanding. What is safe spaces?
Safe spaces has to do with basically the extent to which we reduce the opportunities for crime and violence to occur that are a result of situational factors. So under that particular pillar of the CSP, we're focused on ensuring that we have parks and green spaces where people can safely recreate. We're ensuring that we have safe passages that children can commute to and from school and people can commute to and from work. So under that program, you have, for example, JSIF rehabilitating roadways, ensuring that there are guardrails established for children to commute to and from school safely without the threat or the risk of being hit by a motor vehicle. We also have programs being rolled out as it relates to the rehabilitation of streetlights so that you don't have dark areas where people cannot safely commute. So the situational factors that aid in the proliferation of crime, we want to, through safe space, through this arm of safe spaces, reduce the prevalence of crime and violence through those kinds of social intervention. And through that, we're also building out that, as I said, over this financial year and the next, we're also expanding under that safe spaces umbrella. The Ministry of National Security has rolled out its very robust Jamaica Eye program, which is more surveillance type. And so we are looking at building out the safer spaces indicators in that direction as well, to expand the reach and scope of safer spaces.
Okay, so we're actually looking at those areas targeted in Charles's community.
Yes.
And saying, okay, the kids can't travel safely right now, so we want to create a place and how they can walk to school and come back from school, and they can be on the streets, or whatever it is, and just create a place where they can move about and be normal human beings inside of their own communities.
Correct.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you. Christopher?
Yeah, it's there was one of the areas that I wanted to touch in terms of the front line. Let's say the person is wearing the trenches. In your opinion, are these persons adequately trained to recognize, like, for instance, you mentioned persons suffering some form of a trauma in the communities? Are they adequately trained to detect these issues? And and this probably extends to the police service force as well, in terms of, are they trained to manage incidents involving people with these issues?
Who are we talking about? Police officers? Which?
No, in terms of within the police force itself.
Okay.
Because we mentioned that there are persons in communities that are suffering from trauma and different illnesses. But if you have I think one of the 3 stages of the ZOZO was to clear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, is there a concern in terms of persons with mental issues if the police force is adequately trained to recognize and to deal with these issues?
Okay, so from my experience, and CTD Troas and Director Steele can chip in, from the consultations that we have had from the CSS with the JCF particularly, what I can say without a doubt is that there is constant and ongoing training where those things are concerned, and not just where mental health issues are concerned, gender-based violence, violence against women, and those particular very sensitive areas that occur within some of these spaces. the Jamaica Constabulary Force is constantly undergoing training of its members to meet those standards that are required under a fully functioning democracy. It was just yesterday that CSS met with the Community Safety and Security branch of the JCF, and they outlined a suite of programs that they are rolling out in terms of those kinds of activities, and to also build out their community policing agenda across these different spaces. So without a doubt, those trainings are occurring and ongoing. As it relates to the rate at which it is going and the level at which it is currently at, well, I see Charles raising his hand, so I'll let him chip in.
Okay, Charles, go ahead, Charles. Oh, well, I think that was his hand was raised from. Oh, okay, go ahead, Charles.
Yes, thank you, Donovan. So what I wanted to add to that is that this is an area where I think help could be given, because we don't have enough individuals who are trained to a great extent to deal with these problems. In Jamaica, it's just a few people to deal with a large number of people. And perhaps this is something we could offer to the JCF to assist them in being able to detect this and to work through those problems. Even if you look at the kind of work being done in communities, one of the areas where I detect a gap in terms of what we've observed is that there are not enough programs that have this kind of in-depth intervention. It's at a much shallower level where you offer training, analytical counseling, and so on. But many of these youth have deep-seated problems that require psychiatric or clinically trained social workers to intervene. And this is an area, I think, where we could welcome support.
I like you say that. I really like it. But do you accept? Okay, does the police accept this type of support from civilians that are out here, or you have to be somebody in law enforcement? Because there was a conversation last year between the diaspora and the commissioner, and there was something. No, it wasn't the commissioner. It was the minister, and there was something uncomfortable about whether or not we as a diaspora can insert our resources directly into the police department, or how do you get to do that? Because it's kind of a tough.
Well, that's not a question I can speak to. I'd have to leave it to those directly in the ministry. But there are other ways of working without seeming to step on toes. Right. That's what I'm thinking of. Because
I want us to be able to do it the right way so that it's.
Yes. So I'll leave it to the technocrats in the ministry to speak to that.
Yeah, I think Renee hand is up as well, so she probably want to say something to that.
Yeah, thanks, colleagues. So I support the points raised by Dr. Johnson and Charles. I think, however, that at some point, a line has to be drawn in the sense where the police has to be afforded the opportunity to do policing, right? So we know from experience that they are overburdened because of the significant issues in our most volatile and vulnerable communities. The police is always called to be head cook and back washer. So he's a policeman or a policewoman. He's a mentor, he's a father, he's a brother, he's a sister, he's an uncle, right? So in terms of having a more sustainable response, if it is that we can look to create a mechanism where we train our community persons with those particular skill sets, they then can in turn provide that support to the police. They are the individuals who reside in the communities. They are the ones who know the young persons who are most at risk. So I think we need to focus more on training and empowering our communities to treat with its own issues. This will then allow for, and again, just to add that you can do that and also include police officers in the midst of that training to build greater synergies between the police and the community. And the community over time will be more accepting of its role, be more empowered of its role to then best support the police.
I hear you.
And I would add to that, having on call a cadre of very trained people who can right. be referred to support rather than having, as Renee says, the police having to be jack of all trades, having that specialized skill available that can be called on as needed, but not putting more burden on the police than to be able to identify problems that needs to be referred.
Right.
But is there any mechanism that you're aware of that's going to be in place to address that? Because as you mentioned that, I'm just thinking of the JPs, right? And in various communities. So is there any mechanism that you're aware of that's going to be rolled out where the general public can sign up to be part of this, so at least you can offer training to those who want to be a part of it?
I think the ministry has to speak to that.
So there are existing mechanisms. So just from the top of my head, I love giving kudos to JDTAN because I found our past exchanges to be so easy, and the results were, phenomenal. So I'll make reference to our partnership with JDTAN. It was last year, Leo, 2020, right, for COVID, where over simple conversations, Ministry of National Security had highlighted a particular need that we wanted to give school supply support to children in targeted schools and communities. And that exchange worked out so seamless in terms of the response and support, tremendous support that we got from JDTAN. I say that to say that the various MDAs, national security is here, CRP is here. CRP works very closely with SDC and what you call the interagency networks. Those are parish-based networks. It's very easy to identify community persons through existing mechanisms. And you simply have to say to us, we have the experts, we have the trained personnel who's willing to train, fingers crossed, free of cost, because you know that we're tight on resources. And we can always facilitate that type of exchange. Again, it goes back to just having a framework in which we can do it in a very clean and succinct way. So we organize the training, we establish a database, we can keep track, which persons have been trained. When we know who has been trained, we in turn then can refer those persons to lend support to the police or any other MD that is seeking to give services in a community.
Like that.
Okay, sounds good. I have a question coming in from the
last question from outside, right? Go ahead.
Yes, it's coming from outside platform. So this is in regards to the involuntary return migrants. The question is, are they being processed and released at the airport? And can you speak to the plan shared in 2020 by the PM regarding collaboration with the US for halfway facility to help with the transition process?
All right, thanks for that, Chris. So the short answer in terms of being processed and released is yes. Let us keep in mind that once the individual or the IRM has not been, once the fingerprints and the biometrics are taken, and there is no reason to hold the individual in relation to any crimes committed locally, the law allows for them to be processed and released. We also see where it is that information is taken from them and where it is that particular reintegration needs are identified between particular MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies, and representation coming from civic society. As much support is given as possible to assist them in their reintegration efforts. In terms of the halfway house, I'm going to be very cautious in my response to that. What I can say is that we would have had extensive conversations or discussions with representatives from the US government at some point in time to discuss possibilities of putting together a halfway house for the IRMs. Let us keep in mind that there was a change in government for some time in the US. That particular change would have had influences on the US's stance or position on immigration, especially related to IRMs. Since we have now had another change in the US, we have seen where talks are again being put on the table to have that conversation. So I would say it is an ongoing discussion with the US government.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. I am going to ask each of you to just take a minute and just wrap up your session for me, and then we will say good night to everybody. All right. So I'll take Renee, since you're already on the floor, to Shauna, then to Dr. Donovan, and then to Charles.
All right, thanks, Leah. I mean, just to be quick, thank you for having us here today. Like I said, it's a pleasure working with JDTAN. It's been a pleasurable experience with working with members of the diaspora. And I hope that from today's session and as needed in subsequent, thereafter, we'll always be able to provide an outline information on what our priorities are. And we look forward to working with you. We know that you have a lot to bring to the table. So we're hoping that in the upcoming financial year, in April 1st, 2022 and onwards, that we can establish greater partnerships with JDTAN and other aspects of the diaspora. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Shauna.
Thank you. I would like to also say thank you for the opportunity to just share on this forum with my colleagues. I believe that it's important that we keep the discussion going. I don't believe that anyone has the monopoly in terms of knowledge and information. And so we can only address this problem together. And we at the Ministry of National Security remain committed.
Excellent. Dr. Donovan.
I want to say ditto, but I know that is not permitted. So I will say thanks for the opportunity. We're focused on citizen security. We're focused on improving the lives people lead. We're focused on making people's lives richer and more unfettered. And as my colleague said, this is not a one-man show. It cannot be done by one person. Through that overall aim to make Jamaica the place to live, raise families, do business, we all can work together to make that happen. So we are welcoming the partnerships that can further that mandate.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Mr. Clayton.
So I won't say ditto. I would say, I echo the sentiments. I echo the sentiments that were expressed earlier on. And we have been working together for now, 3 years from 2019? It has been a wonderful partnership. We have managed to link with others, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And as you can see, from who's gathered here, we're not anymore a divided government. We're a united government working together for the same goals and objectives, and ensuring that where there are this divisions, we pull it together. So I encourage everybody to work together on the platform. They have shared a common platform that the security architecture is built around. And what we're doing, we have a broader mandate, but we are supporting as priority this particular security architecture as we go forward. And all of our strategies and programs underneath are in support of that architecture, as should the rest of the government be. So we encourage everybody to come together under that and contact us, and we can clarify and we can link you into the process. Thanks for having us very much.
Come on, thank you. And I'll turn this over back to Christopher Williams. Good evening. Thanks, Christopher.
Thank you. Angela, are you there?
Sorry. Yes, I am. Okay. Okay. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. Thank you, Mr. Charles Clayton, Director of PIOJ, Dr. Donovan Johnson, Data Manager, Citizen Security Secretariat, Mrs. Renee Steele, Director of Crime Prevention of National Security, Ms. Shauna Turwers, Chief Technical Director of Minister of Security. We appreciate you being here today. Everyone has learned a tremendous amount. I've sure learned a lot. I particularly appreciate the fact that I heard a lot about collaboration. Going in and out, I'm sorry. I particularly heard a lot about the collaboration between the agencies. Dr. Donovan, you spoke a lot about the implementation process, that you know very well about the you don't do the implementation, but you know of the process and you monitor it, and the evaluation is coming from your department, which is great. So Mr. Charles spoke about the tool, the community readiness assessment tool, which is super, because you want to decide if the community is actually ready for the intervention that you're going to do. You guys are doing an outstanding job. We appreciate you. You gave us a lot of information, and thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will be in touch. Thanks.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, Leo. Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.